Such a pleasure for you joining us this morning. My name is Anuoluwapo Stevens. Now let's get some data on this. So the current state of Nigeria economy is quite challenging, and the economic growth in Nigeria slowed from 3.3% in 2022 to 2.9% in 2023 due to high inflation and of course sluggish growth in the global economy, which declined from 3.5% in 2022 to 3.2% in 2023. Now, inflation rose from 18.8% in 2022 to 24.5% in 2023 due to rising fuel costs and depreciating of the naira. Now, we saw petrol prices increased 167% from naira 254% per liter in May 2023 to naira 671 in December 2023. Now, I could go on and on and on and on this, and we're also seeing the ripple effect all of these things actually is having as regards the state of the economy and of course on Nigerians as well. Right now in the country, we are seeing a situation of petrol hike. We're also seeing there's also the conversation of availability of the product. And interestingly, this is the second time in 2 months Nigerians are experiencing the issue of petrol hike in price. Now, the first time this thing happened during the course of, I think 2 months ago, we saw our president in China at that point, and he made a statement I would love you to listen to at this point.
The country is going through a very strong phase of reform. And this reform is taking a very bold and hard decision. For example, you might be hearing from home now in the last few days about fuel prices. But can we help it? Can we develop? You use their good roads there. You see electricity being constant. You see water supply being constant and running. And you see their good schools. And we say we want to hand over a banner without staying to our children. What is the critical path to get us there? If we cannot take hard, painful decisions to pave the way for that country that is so blessed, so talented.
That was Mr. President the other time in China reacting to the prevailing situation in the country. Now, our focus today will be on Nigeria economy, as I said during the course of the beat. And I'm being joined this morning by Professor Sylvester Odio. He is a professor of political science, Department of Political Science, Lagos State University. Good morning, Prof, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Stevens. Thanks for bringing me here.
Absolutely. Now, the first question I'd love to ask you is, how have you been coping with the realities on ground now, right here in Nigeria?
Well, I think it's very pathetic. It's pathetic to talk about my personal state. Professors in Nigeria don't earn up to $500 in a month. So with the state of economy it literally means that we are impoverished, as a subclass within the Nigerian, classes. On Saturday morning, I had to take a bus from my abode to a place called Ikotun. And I just felt that if I were to drive my car from my house to Ikotun, I would spend, on the average, 20,000 naira, to buy fuel. But that will not be up to a quarter of my tank. So I entered the public transport, to go to Ikotun and back to the house. That tells you that we are already also adopting coping strategies in the midst of, the sufferings in the land.
Interesting. Now, before I would even love to talk more as regards how Nigerians quickly adapt to interesting situation, what really are your thoughts on the current state of Nigerian economy generally?
Well, I think it is very obvious to anyone who understands, the way economy functions. Nigeria economy is right now prostrate. It's directionless. It's drifting. And Nigerians are suffering. That's the summary of it. In a country where there's no productive activity, you can't talk about, a functional economy. You can't talk about a stable economy. The country is externally oriented in terms of consumption. You import everything into the country. And the country is not even producing the so-called cash crop to which the colonial economy oriented the country into. We are, relying on the extractive industry, export of crude oil. And our OPEC quota, we are not able to even meet it due to our inefficiency, the malfeasance in the industry. So that's the state of the economy today.
Now, over the weekend, we saw NNPCL outlets in Lagos selling a liter of petrol for 999 naira from the initial price of 855 naira. In Abuja, it went to 1,030 naira from 897 naira per liter. And of course, in other filling stations, the price of the product goes for as much as 1,050 naira in some parts of Lagos State. Now, the question is, how do you think the government's economy policies have impacted the economy? What really is going on?
If you ask me, it's like putting old wine in an old bottle. Not even an old wine in a new bottle. Because the policies that the government is implementing is the so-called structural adjustment policies of the 1980s. It's being reinvented, in different ways, but it's the same thing. From 1986, the Babangida regime started devaluing the Nigerian currency, the naira, up to where it is now, 530 naira as at now. So that is the policy. They ask you to devalue, your currency, and the government came, devalue the currency, not as a result of market forces, forces of supply and demand, but through whimsical policy pronouncement of the government. And renowned economists will tell you that you don't devalue your currency when you are not producing anything. The only product Nigeria produces, or that it extracts from the soil, the natural resource, is crude oil. And that crude oil is already denominated in dollar in the future market, as they say. And yet the government says it's devaluing its own currency. I do not know for what, because we are not producing anything, that we are exporting to other countries, so that you can say, when you devalue, as China and Japan will do, then you then have what they call a comparative advantage, in terms of the demand for your product. It does not exist in this country. And so, if you ask me, the whole question about oil subsidy, I have always said over a decade that oil subsidy is a mathematical fiction. It does not exist. It's all a scam. It does not exist. How do you subsidize your own product The product that brings in foreign exchange earning that is allocated at, among the states of the federation, you tell Nigerians that you are subsidizing it. Common sense economics says that if you have a product, you have to meet your self-sufficiency, level before you can take away, the extra product. And that is it. It is common sense. And all they have continued to do is to jumbo figures, give all kinds of dubious reasons why the price of fuel, or PMS had to increase. Nobody tells us about the byproducts of crude oil, what is happening to them. We don't have the mathematical calculation. So Nigeria as a whole is being hoodwinked, by warped, ruling elite that we have in this country.
Now, if I can deduce everything that you have been saying so far, Prof, regarding fuel subsidy being a sham and being a scam, could it be that we do not have enough transparency in the system? Because regarding the new hike of price of petrol, there was no information telling Nigerians to prepare ahead for this to come. So what would you say regarding the transparency surrounding the petroleum sector in Nigeria?
I mean, the question about transparency is not new. Everybody has always made the point that there is an opaqueness the way NNPC is run in this country. The oil industry is run in this country. The oil industry is one feed, for perfidy, for primitive accumulation of resources by both the Nigerian ruling elites, and their cronies. Non-state actors are looping into the oil pipes and siphoning the crude. Those the security forces that are meant to guide, the export of crude and production are also taking, their own bit of it, and the rest of them. While the government agency that is supposed to manage it is also not transparent, and also exploiting the same resources through primitive accumulation. So when you have a state that lies to itself, it becomes difficult to govern that kind of state. That kind of state is headed only to what Adebayo Williams used to call the road to Kigali. Because since we get to a point that everything will break down and Nigerians will revolt inevitably.
Now, one will begin to wonder what really and what truly is the cause of the current situation in the country, especially regarding fuel, because another school of thought says that Nigeria's petrol price is strongly correlated to its exchange rate. Now, in 2015, we saw official exchange rate being 197 naira, and of course, the price of petrol as at then was 87 naira. Now, fast forward down to 2020, where we saw that the official exchange rate was 381 naira. And of course, we saw the petrol price being sold for 173 naira. In 2024, as at now, we're seeing the official exchange rate being 1,605 naira. And of course, petrol price being sold for almost 1-2 in some places. What would you say to this?
Of course, they would come with their voodoo economics to tell you about the devaluation of the naira. We just talked about the devaluation of the naira. Was the naira devalued by market forces? No, it was by a whimsical government policy. So they cannot be talking about the exchange rate at all in this case. Why have they refused to fix the refineries in the country? The country has 4 refineries, and everybody know, the factors responsible. Collusion of government officials. Over 20 billion by some estimates dollars have been, expended on the so-called turnaround maintenance of the 4 refineries, and we have gotten nowhere. I have always made this point that when a country is saddled with this kind of warped elite, it has to be an elite purge, whichever way it takes. And that is the only way this country can move forward. We are moving in cycles of lies. Nigerians are being hoodwinked on a daily basis. There's no economic logic that says that a people cannot benefit from a natural endowment. they cannot benefit from a natural endowment. And that natural endowment has to be given to foreign interests, and those who have captured the Nigeria state for their own enjoyment only. There's no economic logic that says that. Nigeria needs, patriotic, nationalists, to turn around, the fortune of this country. If we leave the country in the hands of this current present elite, Nigeria is doomed.
Well, let's hope Nigeria don't get doomed, and that is why we're having this conversation right now and looking for a way forward to all of this. But before we move over to the way forward and the solution, recently we saw the World Bank release a report, because away from petrol, when we talk about the economy, it's engrossing a lot of things. There's food, there's agriculture, there's security, alongside petrol as well, which has topped the charts over time in the country. But recently, we saw a report from the World Bank saying Nigeria is also facing a worsening food security crisis, with over 1 million people experiencing severe food insecurity in 2024, which is this year, compared to 2023. Now, this morning on our news headlines, we saw a report that says the price of bread is rising faster than inflation itself. And there is also the prices of crates of eggs as well, which Nigerians are lamenting to at this point. Now, away from the fuel situation, what do you have to say regarding the food, especially regarding the cost of living in Nigeria?
Well, I think the cost of living is a consequence, of mismanaged, economy, misplaced economic policies in the country. That is the point to make. Everybody knows that Nigeria was largely an agrarian, society before oil took, the front burner in terms of resource earning, for the country. Now, why are we not able to feed ourselves today? A lot of factors, can be adduced. But the point is, the point is that government policy, has not focused, has not paid attention to reinventing, the agricultural sector in this country in ways that we can feed ourselves. Nigeria has, rich arable land, for planting. The weather is also favorable that certain crops can be harvested 3 times in a year, and yet we are not able to do so. Even our educational policy, we are not, reorientating our students in ways, they can take agriculture, as a vocation, as a career, where of course they can also earn income and advance the well-being of the country. That is basically that. And you and I know that in the last 15 years or so, since the advent of Boko Haram and the so-called bandits that the politicians themselves invited into this country, people can't go to their farms. People can't farm. People are afraid to go to farms. So that has induced, local food production. I've always made the point that even if we were to do what the economists call autarky, locking ourselves inside this country, reinvent the economy. Nigeria has a huge population such that you can have an auto, economy that functions, and that people are able to, buy what they need, produce what they want to produce, and have a market for what they produce. So, but policy in this country has not been about the Nigerian people. It has been about the few elites, and their paymasters in Paris, London, and Washington. That is what, happens on a daily basis. All these policies that they have implemented, whether VAT, whether removal of oil subsidy, these are World Bank and IMF policies, And the literature on IMF, World Bank policies globally is so rich that about 10 or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, a book came out that was titled 50 Years is Enough. That all the policies that they have, imposed on countries across the world have not worked. So it is time to look the other way, to look at our internal dynamics, do backward integration, revive the industries in this country. And Nigeria as a country, we bounce back, So there are a lot of things that are required to be done, in terms of reorienting Nigerians, and practical, pragmatic policies to reinvent the Nigerian economy.
Let's talk about the people, Nigerians, who are honestly and bluntly facing all of this, because every single person in one way or the other is actually facing. Gone are those days where we talk about class, we talk about the middle class, the lower class, and of course the elite. Right now, I think we just have the lower class and the elite. How have Nigerians been taking it? Because I have observed personally that there's this tradition with adapting to any situation. Is that really a problem? Because we saw it some time in France when the prices of bread was actually increased, and we saw that how this sparked revolution in the country, and how of course it forced the government to do the needful regarding bread. Let's talk about the issue of adapting quickly to any situation we find ourselves in the country, and how maybe politicians can take that to be a tool to ensure that some of these policies just fly and then we move on with it.
I don't think that Nigerians are docile. Nigerians are not docile. The reason why you think that people are able to cope is what Gora Hayden calls economy of affection. You know, Nigeria is largely a communal society. You know, you can get help from your sixth cousin, not even your first cousin, your siblings, and the rest of them. I think that is the bulwark, you know, that Nigerians have, that has sustained them, why they have not been able to react, you know, violently the way they ought to. But I can tell you that there's always a limit, you know, to endurance. By the time Nigeria's economy becomes depersonalized, you know, and loses its communal nexus, then the government will know what it takes to manage, you know, a country. Nigeria will necessarily fight back. They will fight back. And let me also tell you that if you look at, you know, changes in government over all over the years since independence, it is the yearning, the cries of Nigeria that has always resulted in regime change. It may not have resulted in a qualitative change, but there has always been regime change when Nigerians are fed up with any particular regime. And I just hope that these policies don't truncate our democratic process. That's my prayers.
Now, since the kickstart of President Bola Tinubu administration, we've seen two protests happen within the space of 16 months thereabout. The first one was hashtag End Bad Governance in Nigeria. And of course, the second was in October, the Fearless in October protest. Do you also perceive Nigerians hitting the streets soon enough? Because I did see an interview with the National Labour Congress President, Joe Ajero, where he was talking about the fact that he has to meet with his colleagues before we even talk about hitting the streets again.
Let me tell you, I've been part of protests in this country since 1986. I can tell you I understand the logic of the streets. But the way things are going, Nigeria will witness a new form of protest that will shock the government itself. If I, as a professor, cannot leave my house to go to the office because I don't have the resources to do so, because my salary can barely buy my food in the house at the end of every month, it means that you are going to shut down the entire federal establishment, including the subnational government. They will be shut down because people will not leave their house for their work, you know, places. So maybe they will be governing, you know, furnitures in the offices where they claim they are in public office. They are in public office and supervising the affairs of this country. That is going to happen. When Nigerians can no longer leave their house, the country would have collapsed. That is where these people are taking us to. Because I have not seen light at the end of the tunnel of the policies that they have enunciated.
Now, even the federal government's response to all of this, I would love us to look at it critically now. Because over time, we've seen conversation, and also heard conversation and seen in the news the issue of palliative being given to Nigerians. And then the next thing you see is rice. And a lot of Nigerians, I feel Nigerians at some point are right now tired of this rice palliative economy and situation. But away from giving out handouts and away from giving out palliative, what do you think should be done to cushion the effects of hardship Nigerians are facing at the moment?
Can never solve, you know, fundamental economic problems. We just have to reinvent the Nigerian economy. We have to invest in production. We have to invest in production. Production. Our academic curriculum, has to be directed towards production, and there has to be a reorientation of the current ruling clique in Nigeria, on the need to take Nigeria first. Look, the money that is being spent on so-called palliatives, which are looted, by the politicians themselves and taken to the market and resold, to the same hungry public, that money can be invested genuinely in production processes. Let me take our state, Edo State, for example. If you look at from Sobe to Oluku, that is a plantain belt. And you see them harvest them and they get spoiled within a short period of time. Oriomo, you see pineapple, produced yearly and they are spoiled. They are not used. Cassava, the same thing. And even maize production can be planted 3 times in a year, in a state like Edo with about 11 inches rainfall. These things are not being done, And a government cannot tackle the security problems so that people can go back to farms, and produce. And so when you rely on everything that this country needs, from, you rely on outside, import into the country, then it becomes problematic. So it is possible to reinvent the Nigerian economy by, first of all, investing in self-reliance in food production. This is possible. This can be done even within a year.
It's really shocking that a country blessed with mineral resources and lots of natural resources going through hardship, and especially with the food aspect, that's like really totally away from all of it. But do you think we're getting to a place and a time in Nigeria where every single family would be forced to have a mini plant or a mini farm in your house to help yourself? Since we've seen all that the government can give us at this point, while we're still anticipating more from them, do you think we're getting to that stage in Nigeria, or we are there already?
So Nigerians are trying, different coping strategies. But those coping strategies will not work without, a conscious government policy, state policy to direct those micro efforts that Nigerians are putting into the production process at various levels. And that is why you have to have a government. The state is not a state of, it's not to be left in a state of anarchy. People must be guided by government policies. And people go to the farm, or they try to cultivate mini farms, and they can't even walk to their farms because of insecurity. They don't have any means of storing, even farm produce, because energy is still problematic in the country. So government must put in place fundamentals, upon which the people can leverage upon to meet their existential, needs.
Now, when you say fundamentals, what do you mean? Can you help break it down?
When I talk about fundamental, we are talking about concrete economic pillars. Government in this country has always talked about, diversification of the economy. We all know that we can produce what we eat. We can't produce what we eat. It is possible to do so. And so how do you invest on that? You create, of course, feeder roads so that farmers can, take their products to the nearest, marketplace. You create silos, in major parts of the country, depending on what they produce in those areas, where this, government can, of course, be the off-taker of this excess produce from the peasant farmers and take them to the silo and made available to the market, during, time of, during lean season. And when you have that, you have, an unbroken, production process, because people know that when they produce, people will buy. Not only that, they also have enough, they also have enough to eat, so for subsistence. Now, what is even more dangerous now is the inroad of GMO foods, where they are trying to destroy natural, crops, in place and replace them with GMOs. You need a policy that must ensure that we produce the natural, crops that God has given to us in this part of the world, so that every farmer, every Nigerian can access, seedlings to plant and not relying on GMO, crops and seeds, which of course are not the GMO food, as you know, they don't produce seeds, for you to replant. You have to go back to them and buy, because they are trying to marketize even food production, in a very fundamental way. That is one of the fundamentals. So when I talk about the government must have a clear policy in that direction, and encourage people. You have an educational policy. You have, for example, Department and Faculty of Agriculture in virtually all Nigerian universities. How many of them have their farms where the students with their overall go to work, or even see how rice grows or how maize grows? These are fundamental policies. So that, so in some countries, universities are richer than the subvention that they get, from the government. So these are deliberate, policies. But we cannot have these fundamentals with the warped elites we have running the country, both at the center, and at the subnational levels.
Looking at the educational system currently in the country, you would honestly also want to agree with me that there are some lacunas and some loopholes happening currently in that sector. Recently, we saw ASU's president come out to complain over the fact that over 80,000 lecturers have died due to one thing or the other. I think regarding the non-payment of salaries. And also over time in the country, we've seen hike in price of school fees. We've seen different reforms. We've seen how the system really is not how it used to be before. Recently, in a report, we saw that Covenant University is now ranked as one of the best in Africa, sort of. So, what happened to our own, government-owned federal universities? How did we get here?
Well, the first thing to say is that don't be deceived by the ranking that you see. We know how rankings are done, across the world. It's also a product of politics and manipulation. But beyond that, state university, private universities in the country cannot survive without the public, the manpower for the public universities. That is already, they themselves know this. And so that is not disputable. So let's not go there. But I think the fundamental thing, which is the point that ASU has been making over the years, is that education must be well funded. Education must be well funded. There was a time in this country, particularly Western Nigeria, when education took the greater part of the budget of the region, which is why people like us today are professors, because of that policy. So you have a government, that is pursuing a policy of illiteracy dictated from the outside, so that you can have a population that is illiterate, a population that cannot think, a mumu population, so that they can ram policies into the Nigerian people and have their way. That is exactly what they are doing. You will discover now at the time, the way they are registering, private universities, they will tell you that government does not have any business to do with the university, education. So people can go to private universities for their university education. You then ask yourself, what responsibility is the Nigerian state taking in respect of the Nigerian people? What responsibility? You can't give them free education. You can't give them free medical health care. You can't give them potable water. What kind of elite do we have in this country? I don't know.
Looking at the private sector still, do you think they have a major role to play in all of this happening in Nigeria? Because I remember during the advent of Dangote refinery, a lot of Nigerians were excited. We saw a light of hope, a beam of hope regarding the petroleum situation in the country. And then Dangote refinery is here and we're having a back and forth with pricing. Dangote is saying, I'm not the one in charge. NNPCL is saying, no, I'm also not the one in charge. What really is the role of the private sector in all of this? Do you think they have a role?
Fundamental, caveats. One, the world economy is capitalist. It's run on a capitalist basis. And the policy globally is neoliberal policy, that says that market forces must dictate the affairs of men and women. That is the policy globally. So Nigeria is operating within that context. But I've had the opportunity of traveling across much of Africa. The crisis in Africa cannot be solved by the private sector or even philanthropic organizations. We should not deceive ourselves. It is the state that is committed, to the welfare of its people that can resolve the crisis in Africa. That is not to say that I'm saying that we should not have a private sector. We should have a private sector. We need those we call national bourgeoisies. Those who believe in their country, those who believe in investing in their country, not those who will steal the money, and take it to and put it in Paris, Swiss accounts, some tax haven in Europe where they store our money. We need a national bourgeoisie that will invest in production. I think that is exactly what Dangote, is turning out to be, by building a 650,000 barrel capacity refinery. If you look at the impact of that refinery, just the main establishment is affecting production in Europe. It tells you, why they want us to perpetually remain underdeveloped. So we need more of Dangotes, those who believe in Nigeria, those who want to invest their resources in this country. Even those that the money they have been stolen, let them invest and give Nigerians, employment opportunities. That way, Nigeria can begin to develop even as a capitalist, state, not just at the margin, but a global player.
Right. The conversation regarding the state of the nation is still on, and looking at Nigeria's economy is on the front burner this morning. But we'll take a break now. When we return, the conversation continues. Thank you so much for staying with us. This is still this morning on ITV right here in our Lagos studio. And we have been talking about the situation happening in the country, which is pretty much evident for every single body to see. The state of the economy, the state of the nation. However, you've been coping with all of the hardships, all of the realities going on, really. I feel like it's a situation of suffering and smiling, and it's beautiful to know how Nigerians tend to adapt to any situation. But is that the way forward? I haven't been doing this alone, as I have been talking to Professor Odio Sylvester. He is a professor of political science in Lagos State University. Now, as we tend to wind up the conversation this morning, looking at the unemployment situation in the country and the youth especially, of which we've been told over the years that we are the leaders of tomorrow, but I wonder when that tomorrow would really come. And we saw during the October 1st broadcast, we saw our president say he's going to have a youth confab to address some of the situation facing the youth. What's your take on all of it?
Well, the independent broadcast of the president, was to declare that there was going to be a youth summit. But I can tell you that the intention is not pure. It's not pure at all.
Why do you say that?
Yes, what they are trying to do is to let's get them engaged so that they will not be doing end back governance protests, in the streets of Nigeria. I think that's basically what they want to do, because it's going to be a jamboree and nothing will come out of it. Because where such national conferences are held, they will be given allowances. They will be put in 5-star hotels and the rest of them. So at the end of 30 days, the youth would have had their own taste of the national cake. That is basically what they are trying, to do. But I can tell you that money can be invested in training, our youths, secondary school leavers, university graduates, in how to manage what I call, mechanized farming. They can train them in how to use combined harvesters, all the latest equipment, extension services, to provide them for those services for peasant farmers, storage, mechanisms and science, of storage and all of that. These are things that the Nigerian youth need. Nigerian youth, need energy. They need light, electricity to engender their own, small startups, and they therefore add, to the national GDP, help us boost national production. Those are the things they need to do. Bringing youth is waste of time to a round table. Many of them have gone to the university. They don't have job after NYSC. So provide opportunity, job opportunity. How do you create that? It's very simple. It's simple. Invest in those productive activities that we have all seen in this country. Let me tell you, consumption alone for an estimated 220 million. Food production. And food production has a chain. It has a chain. Moving of those, products involve haulage, and involves all kinds of micro, businesses everywhere. And so I think if you ask me, this is the direction to go. This is the direction to go. People must come out, must come out and invest, unleash new productive, ventures for our youth to be engaged in. They are ready, to do these things, but they are not encouraged. The environment is hostile. And I mean, these are, these incentives within the national economy.
Right.
The government needs to address those things.
Speaking about engagement, we saw the other day the Minister of Education, Professor TMI, come out to say it should be mandated that before you leave the university, you're not just living alone with your degree, but you're also living with at least 2 skills to help you, be a better person in Nigeria. Do you think that should be the way forward?
Some universities are already doing that. My university is doing that. Lagos State University is doing that. We have a center for entrepreneurship, and we also have a system in which students are, are given the opportunity to exhibit their talents, on an annual basis. So universities are already doing that. And I think that what the government needs to do is to meet the demand of ASU, which is that education should be heavily funded, as a policy, position, as a policy statement, not, rhetoric, that we have seen from previous ministers of education up to the current one that we have.
Looking at the infrastructural development we've seen over time in Nigeria, the issue of bad roads has been on. And I honestly want to believe it has a role, and it is included when we talk about the economy of the nation, because a nation cannot thrive with having dilapidated road structures, not having good water to drink, electricity and all. But let's focus our attention right now on the part of infrastructure and how it has been over time and how it has also contributed to where we are at this point. Because I remember in a particular state, we get to see a signpost that says, do bear with us, this is a federal road, we cannot handle this, we cannot handle that. So right now we're seeing a shift of blame happen in different parts of the country. And where is the Minister of Works, David Umahi, in all of this?
Well, I think the point is very clear. The roads in the country, the federal roads, money has always been budgeted every year for construction of roads and maintenance of these roads. But I think the point is that the money does not go to where it's supposed to go to maintain those roads. That is the problem. That's why all the federal roads across the country, even as I speak, are in bad shape. About 3 days or 4 days ago, I was seeing a video on Benin Warri Expressway that is now completely impassable. People spend 4 hours from between Benin, Saple Road and Furum. 4 hours. That's a journey that used to take less than 40 minutes to make. And you ask yourself, what is going on? Are those governing this country not seeing these things? What kind of heart do they have? This is the question. But again, more fundamentally, I think that the federal government should take itself all the roads, because all the roads, In all the roads we have in the country, they cross every sub-national unit in this country. So to that extent, let the people, this government, state government, take care of these roads. Add it to their revenue allocation. Let them take care of this road. It is the people within these states that commute on these roads. So the question of waiting for federal government or Ministry of Work to come and do a road between Warri and Benin, for me, it's no longer tenable. What stops the governor of Edo State and the governor of Delta State, combining to do that road, put it, in a better shape. Once you do that, people will know where to shift the responsibility to. Because state government who are acting like emperors in the country today, are shifting responsibility or shaking responsibility, to the national government. Because that was also done in Lagos. You see a signpost telling you that this is a federal government road. And all the states you go, they say this is a federal government road. Bear with us. That is the height of irresponsibility on the part of both units of government. It is easy to figure it out.
Turning our attention now to our leaders, our politicians. Over time, we've seen and heard the president tell us Nigerians bear with us. There's going to be light at the end of the tunnel. This would happen. Let's all adapt to the current situation. It's just not here in Nigeria. It's not only happening here in Nigeria, but also in some parts of the world. It's still going on there. But when you look at some of the things our elites do, talking about politicians now, it really doesn't correlate with the situation of things the masses are going through. We see buying presidential yachts, we see you flying and living a certain kind of expensive lifestyle at the detriment of the masses who really are going through a lot right now. You'd hear some masses say the cost of living wants to kill the living. Now, do you think there is a dichotomy between the politicians and, of course, the true realities of what is going on now in Nigeria?
Of course, there's a dichotomy between the ruling elites, and the Nigerian people. Because you just hinted about the cost of governance. You and I know, how do you relate to a situation whereby a permanent secretary earns more than a university professor? A minister earns more than a university professor. So when a country prioritizes its human resources that way, that country is not ready for growth. That country is not ready for development. The cost of governance has to be reduced. And people have said so. I remember I was part of an editorial board that wrote an editorial on the need, to phase out the Senate. Let's have only one House of Parliament in this country. When you do that, you reduce, cost of governance. That's just one aspect. Even those who are the lawmakers of this country, they can be there on part-time basis. That way you cost the cost of governance. But you have a situation where politics has become the only game in town, the only means of primitive accumulation of resources, by every Dick and Harry. And that is why you see in every election, you see the category of people that come out to say they want to lead us. Even when they don't have a hint, a clue as to what the problems, in the country are. So these are the problems that we were having in this country. So there are things that can be done to cut down, government spending, over expenditure in this country.
Now, what do you think should be done? Aside the solution you just provided right now, what other things should be done to ensure that the cost of governance really is up until the barest?
On the public, in the public domain, is the Oronsoye panel report that talks about, downsizing government agencies, ministries, and departments in the country. It has become an issue of rhetoric for both the outgone Buhari administration and the incumbent Tinubu administration. Nobody wants to look at that document. They are even creating more agencies and ministries and the rest of them. So, it's about the responsibility of the Nigerian ruling elite. This country needs a nation-building elite. The country needs a nation-building elite that believe in this country, that believe in these people. I have never seen anywhere in the world where you have this kind of elites that are not concerned about their own country, about their own people. You know, they will push us to a time that nobody will be, will be able to leave his or her house on every month, because when you open your gate, criminals are waiting at your gate. You can't even come out, to take a walk. So that is where they are taking Nigeria to. When we get there, it will become this proverb in Edo. I'm not sure whether it's peculiar to Edo people, that the rain, when they beat everybody, they pay for body. That we might get to that level.
May God help us indeed. I have been talking to Professor Sylvester Audio. He is a professor of political science, Department of Political Science, Lagos State University. I really must thank you for taking our time to join us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, indeed. And that's how we get to wrap things up right here in our Lagos studio. After all of this said and done, let's hope that in coming months and coming days, we see the desired change that Nigerians want, and we have a Nigeria where we have good healthcare system, educational facilities, all in check. The situation regarding fuel has been fixed, and everybody can leave, and those who have jackpot would actually jackpot that and come back to Nigeria.